The Department of Information Studies, we call ourselves DIS, has a long-established international reputation in the fields of information, library and archive studies. So we're quite established. We mainly teach in postgraduate, but we also have an undergraduate offer, which I'm going to be talking about today. And our main degree schemes are professionally accredited. Jeff already referred to SILIP, which is the Library and Information Association. So they provide professional accreditation for courses like this, and this means that they're recognised by employers in the information and library sectors as covering key important areas of skill and knowledge that will enable you to start out on a career in this broad area, which I shall talk about a little bit more. So the big question indeed is, what is information studies really? It's a very broad church, a broad discipline. It's sometimes referred to as information science. It is quite wide in its range, so we can talk about the sort of almost the science and hard social science end of things, but also moves out to sort of the humanities in the sort of the museums and archives range of study. So we're a very broad church really as a discipline. So it does cover these quite distinct sub-disciplines that include things like archives and records management, library studies, museum and gallery studies, and also information and knowledge management. So it's primarily, across all these areas, focused on how information in all formats, and that includes physical objects like the kind of things you'd find in an archive or a museum, but obviously increasingly digital or digitally processed information is created, used, how it's processed, how it's organised in different organisations, and how it's understood and how it impacts and is impacted on by societies and individuals. So, but it also has, so it's got a theoretical side to it, but it also has a professional orientation and background. So the majority of our students are hoping to start out in or further develop a career in libraries, archives, or the wider information, knowledge management and heritage sectors. This might not be where they actually end up, of course, because the courses are good training in social sciences in general. They do develop lots of really good transferable skills, but the key focus for us is the information professions, as we refer to them. I'm going to touch very briefly on specific courses. I won't go into great detail because obviously you can do your research subsequently, and they're all up on the UCAS website as well. Do search under 2022 entry because the courses are brand new, so we'll be offering them for the first time next year. Basically, cultural heritage studies is probably our key scheme. It's the core around which most of our undergraduate offer is based, and does give a good reflection of our interests and specialisms as a department. So the cultural heritage scheme seeks to introduce you to the information and cultural heritage aspects of the library, archive and heritage professions. The scheme is also a response to developments in digital technology that contribute to new ways of working and sharing cultural knowledge across the information and heritage sectors. So it focuses on three key professional areas, which is libraries, archives and museums, but also the broader information profession, and will appeal to you if you've ever been interested in these organisations and how they work. It also includes the field of information management, which could take you into work in a wide range of organisations in the public and private sectors, for example, something like business or media archives, medical or law libraries. This scheme also has a strong history component and allows you to combine an interest in history with practical and theoretical understandings of how information is valued and utilised in all walks of life, so historical, educational and social. Stemming out for this, we have other degree schemes, but that's sort of based around the core of the subject area from cultural heritage. So in combination with your chosen subject, you could do a joint honours in information studies and history, or information studies and media, which is in conjunction with the Department of Theatre, Film and Television Studies. And we also have schemes in information and computer sciences, which is done with the computer science department, and information management, which is done in conjunction with Aberystwyth Business School. So there's a range of schemes, but they all sort of are focused around this key core of sort of information and heritage subject areas. So I'll talk a little bit more about that now. So yes, across all the schemes that we offer, there is a strong focus that underpins and draws the professional sectors together, and that is information and its role in almost every aspect of social and cultural life. So think, for example, about the controversies we've had recently around fake news or bullying on social media, or a current example is the problems that have been experienced by quite a lot of school pupils regarding their access to devices and internet connectivity during lockdown. So there's a lot of discussion around the digital divide and how that really impacted on young people. Over the last 18 months, quite a big division was revealed, actually. We also look at the historical contexts to question what's novel about our digital age and what may actually be longer term continuities, and how organisations like libraries and archives have developed in response to these very rapid changes of the last 25 to 30 years. The development of the internet in relation to this as an open mass information tool towards the end of the last century, combined with more recent developments in social media and digital cultures, means that information in our society is now created, used, shared, replicated, and indeed to some extent misused on a global scale. So one of the things our degree schemes aim to do is to give you the foundations and understanding to navigate this changing world, not only personally, but in a professional and career orientated context. Okay, so in relation to this, I just want to talk for a few minutes on one particular topic, and that's the concept of intellectual freedom, and linked to this, the idea of censorship. So I've chosen this topic because it's something that I regularly teach in the department anyway, and I think it's a good subject to start to give you an insight into the type of things that you might learn about if you join us in the department. So even if you haven't considered these issues before, you'll probably find that you have an opinion on them, and you can think of examples of them in relation to your own studies or in society as a whole. At the end of the presentation, I'll ask you to think about examples, but I would say even if you can think of something as I'm talking, then do put something in the chat. That would be great. But obviously I have a few examples in my head as well. But I'll just talk a little bit about this subject area to just give a little bit more focus onto the subject. Okay, so the idea of freedom of expression, or intellectual freedom, is very much linked to the sense of an open, just or democratic society where people are able to express themselves politically, but also creatively in terms of the arts, something like writing or film, also being able to express an opinion or disagree with somebody without fear of being in some way restricted, censured, or possibly in some situations incarcerated. So the ideal, therefore, might be considered that of an idea of free and equal access to information for everybody, or an unrestricted flow of information in society. The principles of intellectual freedom and freedom of expression, therefore, are key to societies and have been enshrined as a result over hundreds of years in the modern era, and obviously we can look to the ancient world for other examples as well, in a range of declarations and principles, a few of which I'm going to look at here. So as noted in this slide and later on, you'll see that this is also something that's very important to the library, archive and information profession. So I'll keep making these links between wider political issues and the sort of the professional world that we're involved in. In reality, so we've talked about an ideal, that we know that there are many barriers to the flow of information. There are lots of reasons why people might not be able to access the information they need, or might feel restricted or censored in some way. These can be legal examples. You know, the law does place restrictions on people in terms of what they can talk about and information they can access. We could talk about the information infrastructure, for example, connectivity across the UK or globally. We can talk about people's literacy, and that includes digital literacy, so ability to make use of technology, financial issues and geographical issues, for example. I think even in the UK, we know that there are some more rural areas that may not have great broadband or Wi-Fi access, and this obviously can have implications for people and how they live their everyday lives. So there's an ideal about free flow of information, not always realised in reality. And so, as I've mentioned earlier, the rights to intellectual freedom and freedom of speech, and related to this, access to information, have been enshrined in a range of national and international principles and declarations. So I'm just going to touch on a few of them. The example I'm going to give now is that of the American Bill of Rights. In particular, so there were many amendments to the United States Constitution, and they came to be, as a group, they're called the Bill of Rights, and this is the first amendment to the United States Constitution in this case, and it's a very useful one to look at because of how it links to other activities in the world of information and the information profession. So Okay, so this is the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, and it's focused on free speech and freedom of expression. So I'll just read it out. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free speech, the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. I think this is very clearly stated. You have the right to express yourself, to state your opinions. You have freedom of worship and to express your faith. Press or journalistic freedom is also emphasised. And I think we can understand in this context that free speech is really a highly valued principle in the United States today. And we might think about the sort of the political scene in America over the last few years in relation to that, as it's embodied in their constitution. And we'll see as I move along how these principles are also evidenced in relevant library and information professional guidance and support. So I think it's just, I'll link back to that in a minute. On a more global scale, we also have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This was established after the Second World War and is an international declaration that most countries have either signed up to or declared their support for. This is Article 19, which again is about freedom of expression. So everybody has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive and impart information and ideas through any media, regardless of frontiers. So I think that implied in this is a tolerance for views that may be divergent to our own, that a range of opinion is protected, not just one opinion or the dominant opinion in society. And this also brings us back to our professional context again, supporting people's search for and ability to access information. This is one of the key roles of the information professional, of which libraries and information services and archives have been a fundamental part and have been so for many years. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as we've just seen, it's a declaration, it's a statement of principles of intent. It's an ethical position, really. But developing from this, the European Convention on Human Rights is based on this declaration and was developed in 1950 and was signed up to by all the members of the Council of Europe, including the UK. It's not to do with the EU, it's a separate organisation, to protect human rights in a very sort of real and significant way. And this was then formally integrated into United Kingdom law through the Human Rights Act in 1998. So you can see there I've noted Article 10 about freedom of thought and Article 9 about freedom of thought and Article 10 about freedom of expression covers the key sort of areas that we're talking about today. The Human Rights Act has been criticised by some political leaders who are concerned about it. Also gives quite a lot of rights to privacy, and some politicians think this is actually counterproductive in terms of scrutiny, public scrutiny. But it has been used a great deal to defend various cases and is still on the statute books in 2021. But there's been quite a lot of discussion about replacing it with a more focused British Bill of Rights. But I just wanted to show the way that these higher level global declarations actually translate into the laws of specific countries, and then they impact on professions as well. I think it's worth noting at this point that social attitudes do change over time. So what we broadly think of as acceptable today is quite different from even a century ago. And also different cultures have different concepts about what they consider to be acceptable. Social attitudes find their way into law. For example, attitudes towards homosexuality, it's always a really good example, have changed significantly in the last 30 years. And legislation has changed and is still changing to reflect this. So think about examples around marriage in the UK, for example. And similarly, some cultures or lifestyles, the way that they're portrayed on television or have been portrayed in the past, we would now consider to be completely unacceptable, and we would not want them to be broadcast. And I make this point only because I think it's very easy to assume that the time and place in which we live reflects what is the ideal or the standard social and cultural norms that will continue to be forever. But we just have to reflect on recent history, and this can show us that things change considerably and they may change again in the future, and that there's actually a continuous negotiation in society between politicians and individuals and different cultures around what is considered to be appropriate or offensive or acceptable at any given time. So it's never really set in stone. So just I'm coming towards the end of this section now, but I just want us to think very briefly about the idea of censorship. Is it really just the opposite of intellectual freedom? Is it a wholly negative concept, something that can only be restrictive and presents no benefits at all to society, or can it actually protect people from harm? When we talk about it, we think about restrictions, we might think about limits on access to information or opinions. I think these days it's quite easy to consider and to think about when we discuss the internet, for example, because that generates a great deal of debate about what is acceptable. And we, of course, get some very extreme views online. And of course, in countries where there are more restrictive or authoritarian governments, it resonates very strongly politically, where people actually put their freedom at risk by criticising the government, for example. And so I think it's worth noting that, you know, there's no country that really has absolutely free access to information, and that there's always restrictions that are imposed by government and by culture. So there's always some level of censorship, and it does impact on us, in this case in our personal lives, but also in our future professional lives. It's something that we have to consider as future professionals. So I've listed here some professional bodies, including the Library and Information Association and the American Library Association. So all professional bodies around the world of information, as a result, have developed some kind of guidelines for staff when dealing with issues around freedom of expression and censorship. The point of having guidelines is it takes it away from the personal, so it's not so much about your personal opinion, it's more about a professional commitment to access to information. So you'll remember earlier on that I referred to the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights, and this has been extremely influential in, I think, the United States over many years, and is really a key way of understanding American approaches to freedom of expression. But we can see in this next slide how it also has influenced the profession, the library and information profession in America, because they have their own equivalent of what they call a Library Bill of Rights. Obviously, it's not legally binding in any way. It's more like guidelines for professionals, but it's clearly influenced by that position politically. So they make a very clear statement on the role of libraries in enabling access to information and freedom and intellectual freedom. So this is clause 3. Libraries should challenge censorship in the fulfilment of their responsibility to provide information and enlightenment. So that's I think that's a very clear statement. It's actually giving librarians a responsibility to sort of fight censorship or oppose it wherever possible. If you're interested in this, you can read more. It's easy to find online. Just look for the ALA Library Bill of Rights. It's very easy to find if you want to look at it in more detail. But I think it's just really interesting to look at how this links. I think it links quite strongly to the Bill of Rights and the general position of this association on freedom of expression. I'm just going to take you through to, this is SILIP, this is the UK Library Association. They have a similar statement, but it's not so strongly linked to political issues. As we can see there, it's talking about funding, and it's talking about legality. So basically, if something is legally available, libraries don't really have a position to restrict it. They may make decisions about stock, for example, but there's really no reason to restrict access to information apart from a legal basis. So it's a slightly different position, and I think that just reflects the UK political position to some extent, actually. But I just thought it was worth comparing these two quite useful examples around people's access towards people's attitudes towards information, and how that really links quite strongly to sort of professional commitments and the way that people sort of need to work in their professional life. So I hope that's clear, but it's just one aspect of the kind of things that we sort of think about. We have to think quite a lot in our subject area about legislation and what's happening sort of politically and socially to sort of place where we go professionally, actually. So I hope this short presentation has been of interest and has got you thinking about just one aspect of or an underlying principle of information and library work and archive work, and the broader context of information studies. I've asked a question here which is really just about thinking of an example where censorship has been an issue in your life, in your personal life, something that you might be aware of on the news. There are lots of examples, I would say. Recently, it's been a very interesting couple of years around particularly I would say restrictions about demonstrating and free association, about various incidents that happened recently globally and in the UK.